So let's start at the beginning, Entra ID application permissions, right? Because no longer, and I suppose we have to say this, right? It's not just identities that live inside of Entra. Entra is not Active Directory. They're the artist formerly known as Azure Active Directory, and I think Microsoft should never have called it Active Directory to begin with, right? Because applications don't live there, objects live there. You've got user objects and computer objects, right? Those are the two objects specifically that lived inside of Azure. Not Azure, damn it, I can't get away from this. Active Directory, right? And moving to the cloud, all of a sudden, applications now live inside of the same blade. And a few other things that was more the purview of security people. And, if you go back to season 1, we've talked a lot about the role of the identity and access administrator and how that is morphing into some form of security. So when we look at the types of application permissions, there's typically two, right? We've got delegated permissions, and that requires a user to sign in and then it performs a specific function. But that's where the permission model not necessarily starts, but delegated permissions allow an app to act on behalf of a signed-in user. Remember the signed-in user. So when we look at what that actually looks like, this is a simple example. This is an application that's living inside of my tenant, and you'll notice from the permissions blade, it's been delegated, but I have to physically log in, right? And based on that, I can perform specific functions as a user. When we look at application permissions, right, they do not require a sign-in, right? The application performs functions, right, as an application. So an application has a specific identity inside of the environment. And when we look at what that looks like, this is another one. This is an application living inside of the tenant, and they use things like secrets from I wouldn't say a permission modeling perspective, but they don't require an interactive login session where a user has to pass a username and a password, some sort of MFA. They literally, the application uses ID and secrets and all those weird and wonderful things to pass across or act as without a human physically doing anything. Nick, comments, concerns, statements of fact?
So one of the things that we want to consider with application permissions is that these are, generally speaking, tenant-wide, because, well, why wouldn't they be? You install them, you scope them to the entire blue sky and all the world that's underneath it, and then you have access to anything that the application has access to. And the great thing here, at least when you can allowing an app to act on behalf of a signed-in user, is that at least there's that signed-in user. But application permissions are a whole different kettle of fish, and that takes us nicely on to part 2.
Look, now we understand delegated and all the other types, the two types that we have there, right? So why do these permissions actually matter? Well, because we have the flexibility of Entra ID's permissions model, right? And some people have referred to it as a double-edged sword. While it enables powerful integrations, because literally, why would you want a user to log in every single time, right? And a client secret is longer than a traditional password, right? Application permissions, typically you would have an application talk to something that's important to you, like sensitive data. And that could lead to potential security breaches if mismanaged. So I understand that with great power comes great responsibility. No reference to Spider-Man in any way. And misconfigured permissions can, and for the most part they do, right? They go unnoticed inside of the environment, And well, we're not going to ask a question right now, but I'll hazard a guess that I don't think anyone really and truly knows all the applications that's running inside of the environment, and also know exactly how they've profiled those applications from a permission modeling perspective. We talked about, and Nick, one of the, should I call you one of the grandfathers of Zero Trust?
In my day. So One of the great things about Zero Trust, and I'm merely an enhancement to the original model. And one of the things we always joked about is that very much like we do application security today, we trust but verify, but actually we never verify, which is why we had that initial problem. And the reason why or what we should be doing is we shouldn't be trusting anything, including the applications in our tenant, because as Al rightly said, one of the issues that you have is that you could have an application doing stuff and you don't know that it's doing it because there's actually no user acting on behalf of a user, but an application that's being directed by potentially a nefarious character.